Okay, a really fascinating discussion today with Waseem Zafar, a councillor and politician from Birmingham, who is also a very passionate Aston Villa fan and formerly a board member of the Active Wellbeing Society, headed up by Karen Craven, that's famous really for how they engage with the community and make things happen at a very local level, addressing health inequalities and supporting those in the community who need it most to get active. Waseem is also the founder of the Clean Air Society and explains the term clean air apartheid that I certainly wasn't aware of, yet the concept clearly illustrates the need to change the way our systems work to favour those who hold power and influence, and why we need to challenge the status quo if we are to make some real differences to people's lives. Waseem also holds an MBE for services to the voluntary sector, as well as being a non-executive director at Sandwell and West Birmingham NHS Trust for 8 years. So it's a variety of lived experiences to draw upon for us to learn. Waseem was a delight to listen to, a very passionate politician born and raised in a part of Birmingham that has its challenges and really needs the sort of support that Waseem offers. This support includes addressing health inequalities underpinned by a very strong sense of purpose. Purpose, combined with passion and a strong desire to make a difference, really does make things happen. Our sector is beginning to talk a lot about system change and addressing health inequalities, and in order to do so, we really should take time to learn from others who have been doing it for some time now. A really insightful discussion that even made me think about being a politician myself. He is that inspirational. Please enjoy this one. Okay, good morning, Waseem, and welcome to the Conveners podcast with myself, Andy, and John. Thanks for your time today. Really looking forward to this one. We've just spent about 20 minutes talking about Aston Villa, so we won't ask you any more about that, will we? And particularly as Liverpool got thumped last night.
Andy, I'm always happy to talk about the mighty Villa.
Okay, well, let's just start off with a bit of an introduction. If you can take us through your career and associated activities up to date, that would be fantastic to start.
So first and foremost, I'm an incredibly proud Brummie. I was born in this great city. I absolutely love it. I sometimes argue with friends like Professor Carl Chin that I am the true Brummie of the city. And my parents came from Kashmir, migrated here. My late father, I think, came in the early 60s as a young lad to join his elder brother and family. And we settled in the Lascelles neighbourhood. And that's where I was privileged to be elected as a councillor back in 2011. But after university, I did a lot of work in the third sector, working with young people. I was an angry young man. I was really angry that young people were being let down by the system. And yet there was all these reports written about young people without engaging young people, without listening to them. And that anger became positive energy, and I got involved in setting up a youth organisation, working with young people, managing projects for young people. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up 2011 standing as a Labour councillor in my home seat, won with a thumping majority. And I've been a councillor for the last 13 years for the amazing people of Lascelles, and it's a huge privilege. Every day I enjoy it like it's my last day. It's a brilliant community, but there's so many challenges. It's the third most deprived neighbourhood in the city, massive health inequalities. COVID really brought those inequalities, health inequalities to life. We had very low resilience levels amongst my community because of poor health, but also because of the gig economy and people having to go out to work, and they couldn't rely on sitting at home or working from home. It didn't work for them, and we became the epicenter of COVID. So I think I've had the privilege of serving on the cabinet at Birmingham at various times in that during my political career. The highlight being from 2018 to 2022 when I served as the cabinet member for transport and environment, and it was a fascinating time. I led on some crazy things like introducing the clean air zone in Birmingham, introducing low traffic neighbourhoods, school streets, and I went from somebody being a petrol head who's never been on a bike, did very little walking, to learning how to ride a bike with the help of colleagues from the Active Wellbeing Society, doing it in a very public way on social media. So that journey was quite incredible. Going back on the buses, hadn't been back on the buses since I was a student. Gave up on my car.
Did you?
Yeah, we actually went from 2 cars in the household to 1. I shared with my wife. My relationship with my wife's a lot better because I have to be nice to her to borrow the car. So it's been incredible. Like I said, it was a huge privilege to serve as the cabinet member. But I think that the biggest privilege was working with amazing communities and amazing organisations. Social capital and the social asset in places like Birmingham is immense. We've got huge challenges. We've got massive levels of inequalities, but there's a real will in our communities with the energy to get things done. And we're sat at the Active Wellbeing Society's headquarters, and some of the individuals and the personalities within this organisation and their projects are second to none. So they really helped us with things like school streets, helping embed them by engaging and working with communities. I've probably gone on too long. And I'm a season ticket holder at the greatest football club in the world.
Long way to go to Liverpool, isn't it?
I walk into Villa to all the home games with my 8-year-old son, who I used to drag when he was 4, and now he drags me. He's
excellent.
It's amazing. So the Villa is part of my DNA. I wrote an article, actually, and I'll conclude on this, 2 weeks ago on a website called Labour List, where I was talking about the use of the British flag by the Labour Party, about being patriotic. And I said, I'm a Brummie, I'm English, I'm British, I'm a Muslim, I'm of Kashmiri origin, and I'm a Villa fan. And for me, the British flag kind of unites all those multiple identities that I've got and makes me who I am. So that in a way is who I am, to be honest with you.
That's fascinating. Just to follow up on that, and we were talking a little bit before. Like to hear more about through COVID and community engagement and things like that. Would be fascinating. But in terms of your underlying purpose, there's a lot of things you were getting involved in there. Can you say at the moment what your underlying purpose is, generally speaking?
So I have to ask myself, what gets me out of bed?
Yeah.
And I talked about anger earlier. I tell you what makes me really angry, and it's also my key motivation, is inequalities in my community.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. Last week I visited a council tenant in the Lazars ward. The family wrote to me and said, would you be kind enough to visit us? And I went into the house and I saw the poor quality of the house. You could literally, from the moment I walked in, and I thought, whoa, what's going on here? And then they took me out, they showed me their kitchen, where 2 people can't stand in that kitchen. Then they had an outside toilet. And I said, whoa, the last time I saw one of them was like when I was a kid going to my mom's uncle's house. Like I've never seen one of those for a long time. And then I met the father of the person who contacted me. He's terminally ill. He can't go up the stairs, so he has to go to that outside toilet. And then what made it even worse was the mom turned around and said to me, my son died a few years ago whilst we were still waiting for the council and the authorities to bring the outside toilet into the house. And she asked me a question. She said, would you put your kids and your family in a house like this? And, I'm getting emotional just talking about this.
Yeah.
But that is what motivates me. That is a change I want to bring.
Yeah.
People shouldn't be living in those conditions, but they are. That's one example of many across our city and country. And I don't want to get political, but the last 14 years have worsened those inequalities in our city. So my sort of purpose is, I can't do everything. I see my role as a sort of enabler and facilitator.
Yeah.
And as an advocate for people in my constituency, in my ward of Lazars, and where I can help them fix those changes. They shouldn't need my help, but unfortunately they do. So that's what gets me out of bed, is helping those people that are suffering those massive inequalities.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a really great description, Waseem. Thank you for that. I currently I feel the same things. I currently work in Stockport. Part of my work is in Stockport, which is the 8th most polarised borough in the UK. So you have this sort of deep. There are 2 wards in Stockport. One's called Bramall, one's called Bridlington, and the difference in life expectancy is 11 years, and they're 10 minutes apart. And my question really to you is, given that despite Marmot's report in 2010, 14 years later, inequalities have deepened, not got better. What can we do to get the appreciation that you have and that we have into the minds of more people, so that it hurts us in order that we can do something about it? Because I don't think people are aware of the real stark nature of those inequalities.
You make a brilliant point, and in Birmingham we often compare how many years in life you lose or gain over a number of bus stops.
Yeah.
And
There's
a similar example of
Yeah.
say places like Lascelles and Newton and Handsworth compared to Sutton Coldfield, which is 2 or 3 miles away from us, and you gain sort of 9 years of life on that journey. I think decision makers need to listen to communities a lot more, right? And too often, and I'm not just talking about politicians. I'm not just talking about the council. I'm talking about NHS commissioners. I'm talking about people in all walks of life, central, regional, and local government. During COVID, I went in 2-footed because I've been campaigning for better primary care services in my community in Lascelles. So there's a particular health centre that we promised all sorts of activities, but they didn't materialise. And when I saw the figures in super output areas, and I thought, whoa, I know why this has happened to my community, and I went in 2-footed. But out of that conversation I had with NHS commissioners, it was the CCGs back then. Obviously they've changed now to ICBs. I said, I'm going to lead a grassroots level commission on this, and we did. We created the Lascelles Health Commission that in the next few months will report. So it's been a 3-year piece of work where I got the local reverend, the local head teacher, the chair of the local Friends of Park group, community activists, a couple of parent governors from schools, people with a stake in the local community, round the room and said, we're going to hold select committee style interrogations of key decision makers, but we need some grassroots research. We've got 5% of the adult population of Lascelles complete a survey, right? It was never had anything that's been as high as that. So we hired some local undergraduates that lived in the area to do the research, so they developed some skills. But the key thing within that, because there's been grassroots reports before and inquiries before, we got an academic partner in. We went to Warwick University, where we had some relationships with some really good professors who also worked with us previously. Said, why don't you become our academic partner and help us? So the research that we're doing, the evidence that we're collecting, is all verified by a university.
Yeah.
And when that report will be incredibly powerful. It's the voice of the local community about health services with key recommendations and solutions that's signed off by an academic partner who's been who joined us on the process. And then we're going to hold we're going to make sure those recommendations are delivered. So for me, it's how we can put the voice of local communities into decision making. Because I've been on doctors
and give it credibility.
I've served 8 years on a health board. I've also been on patient participation networks that GPs have, all tick box exercises, right? They need to do all that as part of their CQC inspections. But what we need is real voice, and let communities own the services within the area. And as a councillor, I think I'm kind of the conduit between decision making and I always remind people, I'm not the council's representative in Lascelles. I'm the Lascelles representative at the council, and too many politicians get that the other way around. So I think it's being that voice, enabling change. Like, the final thing I'll say is, you've got to be part of that key role. Being an enabler and facilitator is when I get the chief executive or the leader of the council wants to have a catch up with me, I always invite him to my office, which is a coffee shop on the Lascelles Road.
Right.
And I always take them for a walk, and it's always organised. I know who's waiting for them, right? And it's not about bombarding them or challenging them, but it's making so they leave that meeting with me or that walkabout with me better informed about what's happening in my community. So
that's great.
So I think it's understanding that role.
So is it that we need that in order for decision makers, policy makers, do they have to see it through their own eyes and experience it themselves before they really understand it?
Absolutely. In a place like Birmingham, a huge place, I don't think enough decision makers leave the city centre. And I'm not even talking about the wider city. I'm talking about the core. They need to come out in the community, because and what works in Lascelles won't work in Longbridge. What works in Chardon won't work in Small Heath. So it's understanding the diversity of the city, appreciating that, embracing that, also understanding that we've got to take decision making out very, very as close to people as possible, and let them co-design, co-produce services with our decision makers. and let them fly. Let the communities really manage the way they do things.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you was along those lines. You were talking to us before we came on air about the difference between community consultation, tick box exercises, and proper engagement. Could you just touch on that for us?
Yeah. So too often I see. I think people don't, particularly civil servants, don't really understand the difference between engagement and consultation.
Yeah.
Consultation is something that happens right at the end of the process and is usually triggered by legislation, the statutory requirement to consult with your community. And these days, everything's done online. So those who are digitally excluded or can't find something that's hidden away in a particular section of the website, they excuse me, they don't get to see it. Whereas engagement, for me, happens right at the very, very start. And if you do engagement properly, if you allow communities and communities of interest, so if you're looking at bringing forward a cycling project, there's many grassroots cycling groups, right? You engage them right at the start. You take them on their journey. Who better to understand what segregated cycling is than a local cycling group who are going to benefit from this policy? Get them engaged. Ensure that there's co-production and co-designing right from the very start. And then, if you do it properly, when you get to the consultation, it's not your consultation. It's the consultation of everyone who you've taken on that journey with, and the communities that you've worked with. They will champion the consultation. But I don't see that happening enough. And we were talking earlier about some of the things. Some of the things I was able to do with a fantastic team of colleagues at the council during the 4 years I was cabinet member. I'd like to think that communities really felt engaged. And for me, the King's Heath low traffic neighbourhood is quite a controversial subject in Birmingham. It's Marmite. You either love it or you don't. And I let local communities design the project, and particularly the local councillors.
Right.
And for me, and I said to the local councillors, lead on this. You're going to be on the ballot box. They're not going to be. My name's not going to be on the ballot paper. It will be yours. You understand your communities. You live here. You work here. You're passionate about them. Go ahead. You've got the freedom to do that. And when you let local communities and local decision makers take the lead on some things, it's a bottom up approach rather than a top down approach. That usually works better too. So that's just one example. But there are some amazing people in the city. And the other thing is, I love walking into a room where there's angry people, because I see myself from 20 plus years ago as a young man. And when I see somebody angry, if you've turned up on a wet November night, you could be watching, your local football team on the box. You could be watching EastEnders or Coronation Street, but you've turned up into that church hall on that wet evening. The fact that you've left your home to come to the meeting is because you care. Right? There's something that's motivated you. And I want to use that sort of motivation that's created that positive energy for you to enter that room, even though you might be absolutely pissed off with me. Right? You might be angry about a particular thing on your road. I want to see how I can convert that energy into positive energy to be part of the change. But that means holding their hand and walking the walk with them and bringing about that change. So it's how too often we see a room full of angry people. We think, and there are times where it's difficult. There's all sorts of trolling and stuff. I get that. But I think there are some real opportunities of how we can use that energy to empower communities to do a lot more. And the final thing I'd say is, if there's real decision making at that local level, if people have a bit of resources, and I know resources have been taken away, devolution is virtually non-existent. If you've got that in those local communities, you can bring about change, and the communities will drive that through volunteering.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think there's a number of things there that we'll pick up on, including leadership and the qualities required that you clearly have, Waseem, to actually go into that room and see the positives, see that energy, that anger as a positive thing. If you can harness it, it's a positive thing rather than something to be avoided, which I think is often the case. And we'll touch on some of the sort of whole systems approach and place-based approach that Sport England are investing lots of money in. And maybe it's something our sector needs to really sort of understand fully on that one. John?
Talking of leadership, you're the founder of the Clean Air Justice Network. That's a passionate thing of yours, I know. Tell us more about that and the term clean air apartheid?
So, I'm, as I said earlier, I was a petrol head until I got this role that I held between 18 and 22 as a cabinet member for transport and environment. And when I got this post, there was a ministerial direction from government to tackle the illegal levels of nitrogen dioxide in Birmingham in the shortest possible time through the introduction of a clean air zone. So I thought, okay, we're the first city that's going to have to go with this clean air zone. London had obviously the initial ultra low emission zone, and I started to look into it and learn more about it, and I started to understand that this challenge of air pollution, which you can't see, and you can't really taste or smell. I say not really, because there are some cities in the world, places like Delhi and others, where you can smell it and taste pollution. It's that bad, but generally you can't. That impacts on health inequalities in our city, and up to 1,000 people die prematurely every year in Birmingham because of air pollution. And if you've got a driving job, you're 3 times more likely to be impacted by air pollution than the average person.
Right.
And that just got me thinking about my father. My father in 2009 was a taxi driver in Birmingham, 54 years of age, who suddenly passed away. And I'm not, to be honest with you, sure how he really died. He was a type 2 diabetic like me, but his health was generally in control, but he just suddenly passed away. And there's reports every day about the impact of air pollution on a whole series of illnesses like diabetes, heart problems, dementia, all sorts, and the links. And so I became incredibly passionate, led from the front on probably delivering the most challenging thing that's ever happened to Birmingham, which is the introduction of a clean air zone. Other cities did that. Andy Burnham's taken a very interesting approach to the clean air zone, but we had a legal obligation, but me and my colleagues who were driving this, we absolutely felt a moral obligation to get this into our city. But we told the then DEFRA Secretary Michael Gove we need some support, so we managed to secure £50 million worth of resources to help communities through this transition through various different grant making mechanisms. And when I left the cabinet in May 22, I started to talk to friends, some in Birmingham, some of them elsewhere. And one of the things I realised was, you kind of don't realise when you're in that role doing the thing, but there's a huge amount of respect that we had gathered doing this remarkable thing, which we didn't feel was quite remarkable when you're in the moment. We were, you don't realise how big a thing it is. And the one thing I always recognised was environment debates and air quality debates in places like Birmingham are very white middle class debates. Every time I held a meeting in the community around it, brilliant people, activists, but generally from white middle class backgrounds would turn up. Whether it was the whole campaign when we declared a climate emergency or the clean air zone. Yet the communities that suffer the most from pollution in Birmingham are the poorest, and they're more likely to be black and minority ethnic or white working class communities. But they're probably the hardest to engage because they've got competing priorities. Do they feed their kids and heat their homes, or do they buy electric cars and get charging points put up and deliver to? So it just doesn't work. So the Clean Air Justice Network was something and there's some brilliant work taking place at this strategic level. The University of Birmingham were doing remarkable work. The councils, the regional authority, campaign groups, charity groups. But the question was, how can we get more of that information down to communities? And language mattered. So I went to see Karen Craven, and I've got a lot of time and respect for Karen. I'd worked with Tours, and the reason I went to Karen was that the communities that I thought were suffering the most because of pollution, but yet were the least engaged, were some of those communities in those neighbourhoods that there was an organisation with an established relationship, and that was the Active Wellbeing Society. So rather than having to start off afresh and build that relationship, I said to Karen, I've got this idea, and Karen was like, this sounds great. I said, I need your help. I said, I think Tours are best placed to work with me and lead on this. And to her credit, she absolutely got it straight away and said, we need to address it. So for me, when you talk about clean air apartheid, we've got, we literally have got that in existence in our city, where you've got communities who are suffering from air pollution so close to more affluent areas where air quality levels are the same. one of the things I was really pushing for at the council was tree canopy. You look at if you put the tree canopy cover map of Birmingham over the most deprived, there's a direct correlation.
Right.
There's neighbourhoods in Birmingham which have got 35, 40%, or I think 35 is probably one of the highest percent tree canopy cover. And they're the most affluent places, got loads of trees, air pollution's good, you know, it's generally more affluent areas. And you've got communities where you've got tree canopy cover as less as 8%. Yeah. And they're the suffering for the most. So it's how we can link those sort of policy issues and just educate and empower communities. And back in October, I worked with Asthma Lung UK, which is one of our national partners, because the aim of Clean Air Justice Network is not to replicate, not to duplicate, but initially amplify what's happening out there, support those organisations that are already working and doing great work, and I then identify gaps and establish partnerships in those gaps to fill in those gaps. And in this very room that we sat in, we had a conference, and there was a very interesting split. You had half the room of those white middle class folk who were absolutely brilliant campaigners of this issue for a long time, and the other half was of councillors and activists from some of those communities who are passionate about their communities but have never been to a clean air event before.
Right.
And you know, the white middle class folk were absolutely like thrown away, and like they go, "This is the moment. This is the change." You know, we absolutely acknowledge that this is a change we need. So hopefully we can do more work. We can where we're just organising and empowering local communities to drive that change in their community. So not a top-down approach, but going back to what we were saying, a bottom-up approach through good community organising.
Yeah, fantastic.
And what role does active travel play in that sort of clean air agenda?
Massive. In Birmingham today, there would have been 250,000 journeys by car, less than 1 mile. And it's always been an aspiration of how many of those journeys we can convert to walking, to cycling, scooting, or public transport. And I absolutely acknowledge there is some people who can't walk and cycle because of disabilities and accessibility issues. But even if we could just convert half those journeys from private car to walking, to cycling, to public transport, imagine what that would do to levels of air quality. But you can't just expect that to happen overnight. There needs to be a process of behavioural change. And I think creating safe, encouraging more people to walk. And there's been projects like the Daily Mile. The Daily Mile is just some colourful lines in a park, which encourages you to complete those lines because you complete a mile every day. So if you're walking more, if you get your 10,000 steps in, if you're being encouraged to use a bike through bikeability awareness, bikeability campaigns and bikeability coaching offers, give you that confidence to do those things. I think that can play a huge role in levels of air quality, and also your physical and mental well-being, which absolutely. I think is absolutely all links in, and the benefits are huge. But you can't just, I'll give you another example. Tell a family in Lozells, a family of husband and wife and 3 kids, get on a bike. They might be able to cycle, but can they afford to have bikes? Yeah. And that's where the big Birmingham Bikes initiative that Tours have, the community cycling hubs that we're establishing right across the city really works too, because that family can either get free bikes or they can access a community cycling hub, borrow those bikes, go for a ride around the park or their local neighbourhood and give the bikes back. So you can't just expect communities to have that transition. There are loads of barriers. And I think through a variety of projects, we're trying to address them.
Absolutely right. And I think sometimes we fail to see, actually, when it's told you the obvious things, somebody living in a flat on the 10th floor, where they're going to store the bike and how they're going to get it down the stairs, etc., etc. Yeah. We've got to understand these things in far deeper than we currently do.
Indeed.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think the interesting thing as well that you mentioned Karen Creven there and the Active Wellbeing Society, and Karen and the Active Wellbeing Society is usually held up by nationally as probably the best practice in the country in terms. What makes Karen so special? Can you put it into words?
So I think successful institutions have an incredibly passionate leader that leads from the front, that drives an agenda, whether that's Unai Emery at Aston Villa Football Club, or Karen Craven at the Active MBE Society. I got the Villa reference in there.
Well done.
But going back to the serious point about Karen, the way Karen cares about communities and those that are suffering, I've rarely seen leaders care as much as she does.
Right.
And that for me, she's got a whole series of fantastic attributes, but that is the most important one.
Okay.
I've seen her talking to communities. I've seen her walking away from her engagement with communities just gobsmacked about their sufferings. She had a huge vision when she was at the council for the Active Wellbeing Society, and she's driven it, and she's achieved far more than that vision in this amazing organisation and delivered so much change. And it's been big change. They've been able to deliver massive projects, but it's the small little projects in communities that make that massive difference.
Right.
And for me, that is something that's been incredibly special about Tours. And the other thing is she's willing to take risks.
Right.
And here in Birmingham, we're too risk averse. We're over cautious, but Karen is willing to take some risks, knowing full well things might not work exactly as planned, but I've got the right intentions to make things happen. And she's been fine. And she's, a key part of her leadership is the sort of the team that she's developed around her.
Yeah.
Right? She's the captain of a brilliant team. And she's probably the captain who's playing centre back, and she's got some brilliant strikers, wingers are creating assists, but she's been developing leaders. She's been creating. So I've known Karen for many, many years, and I've had massive support from her on my personal leadership journey too.
Right.
She's been willing to give me time and support, and I take that seriously because I've got loads of mentors, and I also mentor dozens of people in the community, both formally and informally. And I think that's really important that you pass. You got to develop the next generation and be ready to pass the baton on to them.
Yeah.
But your role, whilst you're in position, is to develop those that next generation too. So, but she's an incredible leader that absolutely cares about the challenges that exist every day in the poorest communities.
And I think leadership is just so important to there needs. I think somehow we have to increase the capability and the capacity of leadership, don't we, to tackle some of the issues that you're speaking about, Waseem. How would you describe your leadership style?
I always find it difficult talking about myself. Others have interesting ways of doing it. I think for me, I think a leader has to be willing to take risks, and I'm willing to do that. I think a leader has to be willing to piss people off. You're not going to change things by keeping everybody happy. Yeah. There was no way we were going to introduce the clean air zone in Birmingham without pissing off the majority. So in fact, the majority of the city was opposed to it, right? Let's be absolutely. The consultation said that, right? And for a politician, that's a massive risk. Yeah. People told me you're not going to get elected again, but I said then, and I'll say now, I didn't come into politics to remain in office. I came to politics to make change, and sometimes when you want to make change, you're going to have to think big, think long term, and that comes with short and medium term risks. And my huge passion is developing people. I still remember the people that gave me a chance right at the start. That took a risk with me, gave me an opportunity, and I'm willing to do that with others. And I'm willing to, and I always say is I want to be responsible for putting me out of business as a councillor and as else. I want somebody to come in who's going to be far better than me, more skilled than me, more rooted in the community, who's better than me, and that's going to be the time to step aside. So, passing the baton on, legacy, developing the next generation, that is what I'm really passionate about. And developing teams and ensuring that. And the other thing I like to do is I like to have people around me who are brighter than me.
Absolutely.
Members of my team, right? Because and people who have different skill set. I don't want people who've got the same skill set as me, because I will have gaps. I have gaps. I want my team around me to fill in those gaps. So that's kind of it's a Unai Emery way of doing things.
I knew there would be.
You brought it back to that.
Another reference, but I think it's a brilliant description. I mean, Andy and I are both passionate about the topic, and I think we have to get across that leadership is not about yourself, it's about other people, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
create the environment, the right environment for other people. That's your job.
Absolutely.
And allow that talent to flourish.
Yeah, thanks for talking about Karen as well. I think the pair of you, both Waseem and Karen, I think there are various leadership programs, not least the Local Government Association Leadership Essentials program that Martin Allison runs. One of the issues around that, or one of the things they try to do, is bring in people with local politician experience. I think you'd be fantastic to be on that program and to sort of mentor others basically on your approach. I think it's refreshing, it's fantastic, and it's lived experience as well, which is hard to replicate. So yeah, brilliant on you.
More than willing to help.
Excellent. Now then, for the voluntary sector, you were awarded an MBE, I understand.
Yeah, back in 2012.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And that was for services to the voluntary sector?
Yeah, services to the community and voluntary sector, yeah.
Now, our sort of physical activity, sport and physical activity sector is, I think, notoriously bad, with some exceptions, in linking effectively with the voluntary sector. What's your experience of that locally? And is that something that you'd agree with, or is it quite a strong thing? I'm thinking of probably the active wellbeing side has made a big difference there, but what's your thoughts on that?
I think there's some really good examples, and there's some challenging ones too. I think sustaining and keeping some of these small sort of groups and clubs alive is a huge challenge. And I for many years played cricket. I ran a cricket club that no longer exists for many years. It's there's a lot of hard work. I remember Thursday evenings being rolling the cricket pitch, cutting the grass myself, keeping it going. I sometimes see the sort of memories come up on Facebook. I miss it, I absolutely miss it. But it's hard work. It's very, very challenging. And there's been some really good examples. I'll give you an example of the Active Wellbeing Society supporting a brilliant organisation and helping it establish. So I've got a park in Lascelles, George's Park, the only bit of green space in my patch. A few years ago, I said to Karen, let's put on a fun activities day and let's see where it goes. And one Friday afternoon, about 3:00, we gathered there with Active Streets, Active Parks, the Aston Villa Football Foundation, and a few of the Bikeability Programme, Big Birmingham Bikes and others. And as children were leaving school, we just advertised it through the schools. As children were leaving school, they all came to the park, and it was brilliant to see parents and children have fun. Very simple project we organised with, I begged and borrowed from colleagues. I had no money to do it. And the whole plan was to see what is the art of the possible and whether there'd be local buy-in. And a few volunteers came forward, only a handful. And we worked with them and we established the Friends of George's Park, which is now an award-winning friends group for that park that organises all sorts of activities.
Fantastic.
And, I'm there later this afternoon, ironically, with tours, because they want to put a bike container in there. So when they need us, we always say, have us on your speed dial.
Right.
But you and I leading this initiative, we're stepping back.
Okay.
Right? Because you've got the skills, we're giving you, they've had a little bit of seed funding, not major. They don't need much funding. They've got a skill set where they had some gaps, they had some support to develop that. So one of their gaps was sort of bid writing. The tours team is helping them with the bids, writing those bids. They won't go on to deliver them. But it's not tours running that friends group. It's not me as the councillor running that friends group. It's the local activists who use that park, who live around that park, who are driving that agenda. So it's about how to make these projects and groups sustainable. And some of that means infrastructure support. Some of it means skills development, capacity building. Helping them access to resources. A lot of the time, the funding is out there, particularly for those communities where you've got high levels of deprivation. A lot of funders want to target those groups because that's where the money needs to be invested, but they need support. We didn't just say, is that if there's a group of volunteers come forward, set up a management committee, open a bank account, see you later, we're off. No, we've hung around, but we've let them dictate when they need our support. And we've always been there to help them. So I think that model really works. But coming back to so cricket clubs and community-based football clubs, there's the Holford Drive Community Hub where the cricket club that I was part of was there. A phenomenal example. The council worked. I played my school cricket there actually in that part, that playing field. The council sold probably a quarter of that playing field to West Midlands Police to build their custody block for Birmingham. and they use that money, the capital receipts from that money, match funded by with the Football Foundation, the English Cricket Board, lawn tennis, the Boxing Association, to develop that community hub, which was opened by Prince William.
Right.
You know, it's around the corner for the Villa, so he's always
He's a Villa supporter. There's a common thread here.
But so that hub is now running. It's got people like Lincoln Moses and Diane Sawyers. Diane is Romain's mum, who's played football for Walsall, Brentford, and the Baggies. And there's a whole team about. And there's John at the boxing, and they're driving that initiative. They keep. Unfortunately, the cricket sort of disappeared, but it's back there in a different capacity. But it's, you know, you got local people there. They've had the financial support. They've got infrastructure in place, and they obviously need some financial boost every now and again. So there are some good examples, but we can always do a lot more.
It's a fantastic example, and I'm very conscious that John has got a great story about how he developed and football in your local area, John, as well. But I think that voluntary side, which we'll save for another day, but we'll come on to it. John?
I was interested in, you had a role as an NED at Sandwell in Birmingham NHS Trust, and I suppose Andy and I are sort of diehard sort of leisure professionals, and we're very conscious about how the physical activity sector comes across to the health sector, because I think we think one of the things that could create a better future for us all is greater collaboration. In your experience, how is the physical activity sector perceived by healthcare professionals?
So my kind of role at the hospital was an interesting one, where I was kind of seen as one of the community experts, bringing a lot of community knowledge and information and networks to a trust which runs 3 hospitals, is developing a new hospital, to a brilliant organisation that's going and going places with, particularly with the development of the Midland Metropolitan Hospital. I think the NHS system as a whole, the health system in this country, does not appreciate preventative service as much as acute and primary care. And for me, you know, I'm a type 2 diabetic, and I sometimes think, and I've been a diabetic since the age of 25. I'm not a very good diabetic most of the time. I don't really follow my GP's advice as much as I should do. But I just sometimes think, how much does type 2 diabetes cost the system in this country? Just in a place like Birmingham, inner city Birmingham, there are particular areas where every third house has somebody who's a type 2 diabetic because of demographic, the ethnicities, because of the food, because of all sorts of issues that came up with the Marmot report and others. But if we invested more into preventative services, into some of the stuff we were talking about, more into social prescribing, how much that would save the system. Absolutely. And ensure that the well-being, the most physical and mental well-being of our citizens is stronger. People are living longer, people are living healthier, and the quality of life, those years of quality are a lot longer. So, for me, I think the system is broken in that sense. You know, some of it is because, you know, we don't have the benefit of the weather that the Southern Hemisphere have got, and there's not enough outdoor activity. But there's things like, you know, one of the things I took up during COVID was walking the canals. You know, Birmingham has more canal miles than Venice. The canals had a huge role in the development of the history of our city. And just looking at those canals and walking those canals gives us a new lens. Like I said, I was born in the city, but I saw a new Birmingham through those canals. And it was really interesting. A group of councillors, we really missed the council house, would gather during COVID. This is more about mental well-being than physical well-being. We'd gather outside the council house at a particular time of the day during COVID, you know, where we were allowed to have a walk, and we'd go off in different directions from the city centre, because the canals, all different canal routes connect the city centre, and explore our city that we represent. We've lived most of our lives, and for me, all of my life, through the canals. But the blue and green space in our city is a huge asset. You know, we've got hundreds of parks, we've got more trees than Paris, got more canal miles than Venice. but how do we utilize that for our mental, physical well-being?
Yeah.
And I think things like that we don't capture enough. And
Yeah.
that's part of a major cultural shift that we need. We're taking baby steps towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more that can be done.
Thank you.
Okay, we could go on for hours. It's fascinating. Thanks so much. We've got some quick fire questions. And you mentioned about politics, and we don't mind politics. We can talk about anything on the political side. And in fact, the first quick fire question is, what one thing would you wish an incoming new government to do in relation to what we've talked about today? So it could be anything.
So an updated Clean Air Act, which gets us our target levels to be what the World Health Organization is saying in terms of nitrogen oxide, particulate matter, which will be hugely challenging, but the right steps rather than the current legislation.
Is there anything in the sort of, let's assume it's a Labour government, is there anything in the Labour manifesto that, or not the manifesto, it's not out yet, but that gives you hope on that score?
Absolutely. I know it's not as ambitious there. Some of the language from Labour politicians is as ambitious as I'd like it to be on air pollution. And we've seen a huge conversation erupt, particularly because of the London ULEZ. But I'm confident that we'll get there. I think people within the shadow cabinet absolutely get the importance of tackling the challenges around and the inequalities and inequity around air pollution. And there's a commitment for an updated Clean Air Act with WHO guidelines, and I just hope it's adopted as soon as possible.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Very clear.
Bit of a paradox question. What excites you about the future, and what might make you fearful?
What excites me is the commitment. 2024 is a year of change. We're sat a week before the mayoral election. I'm very hopeful there'll be a change, but I'm extremely hopeful that there'll be a change in national government. Not because I'm a Labour person, but I think there needs to be a change of direction. Public services have been decimated in the last 14 years, and we need, I'm not saying we're going to go back to what it was before then, but we need, because not everything was right before then, but we need some investment. We need to rebuild the NHS. We need to rebuild local government. We need to rebuild the police. We need to address the housing crisis. What am I fearful about? The culture wars, right? And sometimes some of the politics I see linked to those culture wars, particularly some of the behaviours of characters like Lee Anderson, Nigel Farage, and others. I grew up in the most diverse city of 1 million people, probably in the world. I've learned so much of people who don't. I've got many things different with. My faith is different to them. My ethnic background is different to them. Dare I say, some of them are blue noses and they follow a different football team. But the beauty of it is that we get on. We find something that unites us. We find something that brings us together, and we build upon that. And I think these culture wars
and diversity makes us richer, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The month of Ramadan was just a short while ago, and just seeing all the different communities come together. Seeing non-Muslims fast in solidarity for 14 hours a day, just to experience it, to learn more, and people to learn about, and host gatherings for Muslims in churches, in football clubs, in community halls. It's fascinating. It's just the beauty of our city and our country and society as a whole. So, like I say, we can have our differences, but it's about how we embrace diversity that makes us stronger.
Brilliant, thank you.
Excellent. And the final one, back to sort of politics potentially, the physical activity sector currently sits in the DCMS. Do you think that's the right place for it, or do you think we'd be better off in the Department of Health, and particularly in the sort of the OHID realm of possibilities?
I definitely have it in health.
Yeah.
For me, that's where the benefits of physical activity for mental and physical well-being, and linking the two. So there's I was a cabinet member for transport and environment, and I led on clean air. For me, clean air is first and foremost, it is a transport issue, it is an environmental issue, but more than that, it's a health matter. It's about health inequality. So for me, having it there and letting Wes Streeting drive that agenda as a Secretary of State for Health would probably be the best place to sit.
Thank you very much. And the final question is, who is there anybody that comes to mind, and you're only allowed one, and it's not, we've already got Karen on the list. Okay. Is there anybody else you think we should talk to and get on the Conveners podcast?
I've been hugely impressed by the leadership the Mayor of London has shown, Sadiq Khan. He's had huge challenges, and not just around equality in particular, not just the leadership he's shown in London, but in his role as the C40's chair, internationally he's driven the clean air agenda, and it's not been easy.
No, with resilience.
So Sadiq, I think he's a brilliant leader. He's phenomenal. He's committed, and he's fought this battle right. He's opened the batting and captained the team.
Thank you for that. Just for one final question, and
I love these final
yeah, I know. I keep thinking something else. That's maybe be here for another hour. Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham. I don't know if you've read their is it Go North book or whatever, and the 10-point plan. Have you got any thoughts on that one?
So I haven't read their plans, but Andy Burnham's work on buses. And bringing them back into public ownership, and the resilience is shown around that, and the determination has been phenomenal. It's been absolutely fun. And Steve Rotherham and Tracy Brabin, as the other two key bears up north in the northwest, have really followed through as well. And there's some exciting. Steve Rotherham has added some other challenges in Liverpool as well. With the challenges of the local authorities. So regional leaders are people are dropping out of national politics to take on regional and local leadership roles, which is made and that's going back to what we said at the start around devolution. Getting more power from Whitehall into regional authorities, local authorities, and ultimately down to the communities is the way forward for me.
I think we need part 2. Get into politics. Waseem, that's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.